Hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Lundquist, and I am the Communications and Outreach Coordinator for Families for a Livable Climate. Thank you so much for joining us for this talk on plastics and climate change. We are going to start with a land acknowledgement, then I will share a little bit about our organization, who we are, the work that we do. Then I will turn it over to our guest speaker, Youpa. For our land acknowledgement, we want to show visually the lands that were stolen from Indigenous people during colonization. We recognize that Indigenous people have been on the front lines of the climate crisis and are and will be disproportionately affected by climate impacts. However, they are also at the forefront in leadership and have been speaking up about protecting Earth for generations, courageously leading water protection efforts across the world and other climate actions. We deeply respect and look to their leadership as much as possible. As I said previously, I'm here from Families for a Livable Climate. Our mission is to create community for climate action, empowering families to advocate for a livable future. Our goal, broadly, is to engage more Montana families in the climate movement. We do this work through a number of programs, including workshops and opportunities like this, where folks can learn about the climate crisis and ways to engage, providing spaces for climate storytelling and conversations, including our magazine, The Changing Times, and our Montana Climate Stories project, supporting, organizing, and empowering parents and caregivers in a number of different ways, and also holding Northwestern Energy, our major energy provider, accountable for their role in climate change and transitioning away from fossil fuels. Part of our Northwestern Energy accountability effort is a letter that we're sending to their board of directors in response to their new net zero plan. You can find the letter on our website. That's livableclimate.org/NWE. Our goal is for 1,000 parents, caregivers, community members, and organizations to sign on in support. The letter outlines the parts of their current net zero plan that we take issue with, including that they plan on building fossil fuel infrastructure through 2035. There is no investment in wind and solar at all. They also propose nuclear energy as a solution without mentioning any plans for handling security and waste. And the plan includes no benchmarks to reach net zero. So our asks are to cancel their new fossil fuel infrastructure plans and transition to clean and affordable electricity by 2030, which is in line with Missoula's energy plan. To invest in proven renewable energy resources like wind and solar, which have a lot of potential here in Montana. And then lastly, to support low-income and tribal energy assistance programs. If you would like to sign on, you can do so at livableclimate.org/NWE. I encourage all of you to sign and to share the letter. That's all I have on my end. Thanks again so much for being here. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful guest speaker, Youpa, who's going to lead us in this conversation about the connection between plastics and the climate crisis. Welcome, Youpa.
Hi, it's great to have this opportunity to connect. I want to thank Families for a Livable Climate for all of the work that you do and for hosting this talk. As Sarah said, my name is Youpa, and I'm a volunteer with the national organization Beyond Plastics in support of their work to end plastic pollution. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that I use the words we and our sometimes in this talk, and generally it's in reference to humans as a species. I want to start with the foundation for why we must end plastic pollution and its contribution to climate change. This is a quote from David Boyd's book, The Rights of Nature. Humans are but one species among millions, as biologically dependent as any other on the ecosystems that produce water, air, food, and a stable climate. Plastic contaminates our water, air, and food, and decreases climate stability. At the core of plastic pollution and climate disruption is the mistaken belief that Earth's resources are infinite, and that we have a right to use them for our benefit, even when the resulting harmful consequences are often directly borne by vulnerable lives and ecosystems whose voices and stories are often not being heard or considered. Plastic pollution from
every stage of plastic is toxic to life. We have responsibilities in our kinship with the web of life that makes our lives possible. Our health depends on a healthy, regenerative, just, diverse, and vibrant earth. As an artist, I collaborate with nature in my photography work. I spend hours photographing water, and I think about plastic polluting water all over our planet. A 2019 Environment Montana study of 50 water samples taken around Montana, a relatively clean environment, found that 66% of the samples contained one or more types of microplastics. While making this mask out of alder bark and plastic from a blue water bottle, I was thinking about how plastic is now contaminating Earth's biological systems. I made this dress from a collection of plastic which had no place to go after use except a landfill or incinerator. I made an absurd dress reflecting upon our current absurd relationship with plastic. When I was making it, I was thinking about the wonder of plastic, the bright colors, and the seduction of the convenience of plastic. The gloss of plastic is interwoven into every aspect of our daily lives, but the harm caused by plastic is not always visible, unless, for example, you live in a fence-line community next to a facility creating plastic pollution. I've been wrestling with my own relationship with plastic for 2/3 of my life. On the one side here you see the 2 plastic bottles that I've used to refill my shampoo and hair conditioner for 40 years. They will continue to serve my needs and last way longer than my life, potentially hundreds of years. On the right side is the weird little messy collection of plastic stickers that I've been peeling off my fruits and veggies to help remind me of all the plastic that is designed to be waste. A couple of years ago, I reached a tipping point that led me to seek ways to do my part to change the larger systems that allow and create plastic pollution. The catalyst for action for me was seeing this photograph of an albatross mother feeding plastic to her chick. An estimated 5 tons of plastic are fed to albatross chicks each year at Midway Atoll. Over 90% of the approximately 320,000 chicks that hatch each year on the atoll contain plastics in their stomachs, and it's estimated that half of them will die because of it. Not only does plastic occupy volume in the chicks' stomachs, leading to a greater chance of death by dehydration or malnutrition, but sharp plastics can fatally puncture portions of the digestive tract. The plastics may also contain harmful toxins which can accumulate in the tissues of the chicks, compromising their survival. As a human and as a parent, when I see this photograph, I shudder with how wrong our current production and waste systems are. It's estimated that by 2050, 99% of all seabird species will be ingesting plastic. When I see what we're doing to the albatross chicks and so many species, the albatross chicks are just one example. And when I just recently read a study about the high levels of microplastics found in baby poop, 15 times the amount found in adults, I have to ask myself, what are we doing? It's likely that many of you are asking that same question. Before I dive into some key plastic information, I want to pause for a moment and talk about hope. We need hope to be able to do the work that needs to be done. This is a quote from writer Ray Bradbury. Action is hope. There is no hope without action. This may seem like a strange image to pair with hope and action. This photograph is of the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland in 1969, shortly before it caught on fire due to extreme pollution. The river was once one of the dirtiest in the United States. Now it has 70 species of fish. When this photograph was taken, there was no EPA, no Clean Air Act, no Clean Water Act. There were no federal legal or regulatory mechanisms to protect our environment. In spring 1970, inspired by student anti-war activism, Senator Nelson helped create Earth Day to force important health and environment issues onto the national agenda. 20 million Americans demonstrated in different U.S. cities, and in December 1970, Congress authorized the creation of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. We have the capacity to mobilize to correct mistakes, and now we also have a growing awareness about how our health and environment laws and regulations are sometimes unjust or inadequate. Your voice matters and your actions matter. This slide acknowledges the work being done by young people around the world. One example that some of you know about in the center is the first U.S. youth-led climate trial held versus the state of Montana, set to begin on February 6, 2023. Ricky Held from Broadus, one of 16 Montana plaintiffs, states the suit is to help us protect our constitutional rights, protect the homes we love and the people we care about. Each of us has something to contribute, whether it's smaller or larger actions. Toward the end of the talk, I will share some actions, but first I want to make sure we cover some important information about plastic, because knowledge provides the power for propelling action.
Sometimes learning more about plastic pollution can be a bit overwhelming. I can relate to the character in this cartoon, except I'd be walking in the woods. She says, "My desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane." So thank you, companions, for being here. I invite you to take a breath with me if you're so inclined. Breathing's always good. So close your eyes if you want, and on your own, if you feel like it, take a nice, deep breath. Okay, here we go. Everywhere we have looked on the planet, we find plastic, from the tops of high, remote mountains to the deepest part of the ocean, the Mariana Trench, where researchers found that 72% of the amphipods they studied contained plastic fibers and fragments in their guts. Each of us is breathing in and ingesting a credit card's worth of plastic a week, adding up to 40 pounds in a lifetime. We found plastic in beer, salt, earthworms, apples, and in human blood and placentas, and deep in the lungs of living humans. So why is that a problem, and what can we do about it? Every year, we produce about 400 million tons of plastic. One example of this volume is that 5 trillion plastic bags are consumed every year. In the US, we use 100 billion plastic bags per year.
On the left, you can see an image from a 2017 study showing the disturbing actual and projected trajectory of the increase in plastic waste. The Global Plastic Outlook report from 2022 projects that without intervention, plastic waste will almost triple by 2060.
Plastic pollutes at every stage, from fossil fuel extraction to what happens to it after it is used, and in the process disproportionately harms people of color and people in economically depressed areas around the world. It is important to remember the harm caused by plastic at every stage because often proposed solutions only address plastic waste. The first part of this image is from the important film, The Story of Plastic, which I recommend if you haven't seen it. I added the orange box to list the different kinds of disposal, or what happens to plastic after it is used. There is no OA with plastic. Plastic, whether it starts out tiny, such as microfibers released from clothing, or whether it starts out larger like a plastic water bottle, degrades into smaller and smaller pieces or components, but never biodegrades and becomes a beneficial or regenerative part of life cycles. Plastic also contributes to climate change at every stage. The report Plastic and Climate projects the annual emissions from the stages of the plastic life cycle reaching the equivalent of 615 coal plants by 2050. The plastics industry's greenhouse gas emissions are on track to surpass those of coal-fired power in the U.S. by 2030. If the plastics industry was a country, it would rank as the 5th largest climate polluter. Most of us know some of the impacts of human-caused climate disruption. In Montana, a majority of climate models project increased temperatures, wildfires, and drought, which we know can lead to decreased health and quality of life. I took this photograph on a smoky walk to my mailbox during last year's fire season. There's the mountains, but you can't really see them. The excessive heat warning shows some eastern parts of the state reached 109 degrees on July 27th last summer. And the drought monitor image from June 14th of this year shows that when the report was published, most of the state was experiencing abnormally dry to extreme drought conditions, even though some parts of the state received a large amount of moisture this spring, and starting on June 14th, other parts of the state experienced severe flooding in places like Red Lodge and parts of the Yellowstone River. In a recent newsletter, the Climate Smart Missoula team reminded us that excess heat in Earth's climate system is disrupting weather patterns and the water cycle, causing greater variability of precipitation and earlier snowmelt. If I took a survey and made a list of what each of us values about living in Montana, we would probably have some things in common. The list might include being able to see and enjoy the beauty of Montana. The list might include valuing a healthy quality of life for our fellow citizens, our families, and loved ones, now and in the future. Part of protecting what we value includes addressing how plastic contributes to climate issues. For more information, Beyond Plastics published a report, The New Coal, Plastics, and Climate Change, which is available on the Beyond Plastics website. About 99% of plastics are made by combining chemicals and fossil fuels. On a side note, most human-made chemicals are derived from fossil fuel byproducts manufactured by the petrochemical industry. It's all very connected. Most of the plastics currently manufactured in the United States come from ethane, a cheap byproduct of hydraulic fracturing. Hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, is a process of pumping millions of gallons of water mixed with chemicals and sand deep underground to fracture the bedrock so the pockets of gas can be extracted. Ethane is a component of the natural gas that is extracted from fracking. Plastic production is one of the few viable uses for ethane. The ethane from a fracking well is piped to an ethane cracker plant at a facility like this one being built in Monica, Pennsylvania by Royal Dutch Shell. The ethane is heated at high temperatures, requiring massive amounts of energy. The process is called cracking because heat energy is used to break apart or crack molecules to form new molecules called ethylene, which is a main ingredient or feedstock for single-use plastic packaging. In 2020, facilities with ethane gas crackers emitted greenhouse gases roughly equivalent to the releases of 35 average-sized coal-fired power plants. The ethylene from the cracking process is still a gas and needs pressure and a catalyst to turn it into polyethylene, the most common form of plastic. A chemical reaction causes small molecules called monomers to bind together to form a chain-like molecule called a polymer. Ethylene polymerizes to form polyethylene. The resins that are created in this complex process are then melted, cooled down, and made into pre-production pellets known as nurdles. It's estimated that 250,000 tons of nurdles leak into waterways each year. The nurdles join other tiny pieces of ever-degrading plastic in our air, water, and soil, where they can cause harm as obstructions and as they leach and attract and absorb toxic chemicals. As they circulate and bioaccumulate in biological systems. A wide variety of chemicals are used in the production of plastics and to give plastics their desirable characteristics, such as strength or flexibility. A team of researchers at ETH Zurich identified 10,500 chemicals in the plastics they studied. Many of the largest and most hazardous chemical families, including heavy metals, flame retardants, phthalates, bisphenols, and fluorinated compounds, are used in the production of plastics. Chemicals used to make a plastic may be released or emitted at every stage of that plastic, posing risks to human health, the environment, and recycling systems. There's not enough transparency, research, or regulation of the chemicals associated with plastics. Plastics manufacturing utilizes the inexpensive ethane from the fracking boom to provide a new revenue source for oil and gas. The overproduction of plastics is being driven by manufacturers, not market demand. As the economy moves away from reliance on fossil fuels for electricity generation and transportation, the industry is producing and marketing single-use plastics at an accelerated pace. The plastics industry is the fossil fuel industry's Plan B. Much of the growth is taking place in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, Louisiana, and Texas. The industry has invested over $200 billion, and 333 new or expanded petrochemical facilities have been proposed or permitted since 2010. Sharon Levine, founder of Rise St. James, a faith-based grassroots organization, is the person with the signs in this photograph. She is one of the protesters of the proposed Taiwanese plastic giant Formosa's $9.4 billion petrochemical complex named the Sunshine Project. The project, slated to be built in the Louisiana community St. James Parish, sits on an 85-mile corridor of the Mississippi River known as Cancer Alley because of the health consequences of the 150 petrochemical facilities and oil refineries in the area. In a 10-mile radius around St. James Parish, there are already 12 petrochemical facilities. The proposed Sunshine Project would emit greenhouse gases the equivalent of 3.5 coal-fired power plants each year and produce 800 tons of toxic air pollutants annually, doubling air emissions in St. James Parish. Rise St. James, Louisiana Bucket Brigade, and Healthy Gulf represented by the Center for Biological Diversity, sued to invalidate the Clean Water Act permits issued for the project in 2019. In 2021, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers ordered it will require a full environmental review of the proposed facility. It's not over yet, but here's an example of hope in action. Because of our time frame, I'm going to move from the production end to the after-use stage of plastic pollution. Since 1950, we've produced over 9 billion tons of plastic, over half of which was produced after 2004. 6.3 billion tons has become plastic waste. Over 40% of production is for single-use purposes, designed to be used briefly, one time, and then discarded. Plastic waste is a global issue. In addition to the plastic problems the United States creates at home, the U.S., like many wealthier countries, is exporting plastic waste, often under the guise of recycling, to countries unable to safely manage it. In an interview, Lily Binti Kamal, a Malaysian woman who lives next to a plastic recycling facility, said that when she grew up there, her house was surrounded by forests. Now the water and air is too polluted for her children to fish or to even go outside. In places like Surabaya, Indonesia, to get rid of the onslaught of plastic, it is openly burned or used as fuel in local neighborhood tofu factories. In one East Java village, a consequence of burning plastic is that toxic dioxins in chicken eggs were 70 times the level allowed by European standards. In a summary about false solutions for plastic pollution, Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, states it's a common myth that the plastic pollution crisis is solely a waste management problem. Any responses that prioritize end-of-pipe technology over addressing the root cause, too much plastic production, will not only be futile, but will also increase toxic and climate pollutants to the environment. Many plastic waste solutions may seem like a good idea on the surface, but they don't look at the big picture of the whole plastic pollution cycle. One question we can ask about a proposed solution is, does it look through a big enough lens? So why can't we recycle our way out of this mess? It's a big effort and there's not much reward. I'm going to mention just a few of the numerous issues. For years, invested corporations have been dodging responsibility and marketing the story that plastic pollution can be solved through recycling, placing the burden to fix the problem on communities and individuals. A recent report by Beyond Plastics and the last beach cleanup documented a recycling rate of 5 to 6% for post-consumer plastic waste in the U.S. for 2021. Factoring in additional losses that aren't measured, such as plastics collected under the pretense of recycling that are burned, the true recycling rate may be even lower. And only a portion of plastic waste is effectively recycled, which means it was made into a similar product or upcycled into a higher quality and longer lasting product. The rest is downcycled. Downcycling can happen maybe 1 or 2 times because of the way the material degrades. Eventually, downcycled products are put into landfill, incinerated, or released into the environment because they will have no recycling value. Even if we get better at mechanical recycling, which we need to do, it doesn't address the whole plastic pollution cycle or the overproduction of plastic. As I mentioned earlier, there are also concerns about chemicals, plastics, and recycling. A recent study found higher levels of chemicals like BPA in recycled PET compared to virgin PET. Here are a few things to keep in mind. Many types of plastic aren't designed to be recycled. It's a challenge to collect uncontaminated plastic for recycling. The few plastics that can be recycled are mostly downcycled. Recycled plastic has little value, and in some cases, no market value because it's cheaper to buy virgin plastic for production. The overproduction of plastics puts a financial burden on municipalities, forcing them to collect increasing quantities of plastic, most of which are not recyclable. A 2020 Greenpeace survey found the following. Only some number 1 PET and number 2 HDPE plastic bottles and jugs can be legitimately labeled as recyclable in the US today. Plastics number 3 through number 7 have negligible to negative value and are essentially a category of products that municipal recycling facilities may collect but do not actually recycle. Plastic number 3 through number 7 waste is put into landfills or incinerated. I recently talked to someone at a local recycling company, and they said there is a market for number 5 PP polypropylene, though they don't have the resources to collect it at their drop-off site in Missoula, which leads me to speculate that the material probably doesn't have very much value. We can reduce our consumption of plastic by doing things like bringing our own bags and using refill options when we can. We can try to avoid buying single-use plastics, but avoiding plastics can be difficult because we don't currently have many choices. We can recycle the number 1 and number 2 plastics that we can and pressure businesses to provide better options. As important as individual actions are, this problem is too big to be solved at the individual level. We need better regulations to reduce the overproduction of plastic, particularly single-use plastics. Another false solution for plastic waste is incineration. 12% of plastics is incinerated. Incinerators emit 68% more greenhouse gases per unit of energy than coal. Despite being major contributors to climate change, the industry stays afloat by relying on renewable energy credits, costly subsidies, and externalized costs, siphoning public tax dollars away from real renewables and other more cost-effective solutions. Some of the toxins emitted from incineration include cancer-causing, endocrine and immune-disrupting dioxins and furans, and heavy metals, including mercury, cadmium, and lead. Modern air pollution control devices can capture and concentrate some of the pollutants in the incinerators. However, they can neither prevent captured pollutants from being released into the environment in the form of ash, slag, or sludge, nor can they capture hazardous ultrafine particles. Of the 72 incinerators operating today in the US, 80% are sited in environmental justice communities. The Covanta incinerator in Chester, Pennsylvania is the largest of its kind in the US. It burns about 200 tons of recycling material every day. In an interview, Zuline Mayfield, a lifelong Chester resident, said they truck the trash in, so there are about 400 to 500 trucks that go in and out of that facility a day. She also said the impact of the incinerator on our neighborhood is that 38% of our children have asthma now. We have a high infant mortality rate. We have high incidences of cancers. You cannot open your windows because the smells just permeate throughout your household. Other false solutions include so-called advanced recycling technologies that a Reuters 2021 report acknowledges are being marketed and touted as environmental saviors that can allow for the plastics industry's continued growth amid mounting global pressure to curb the use of plastics. These methods are primarily techniques for using high inputs of energy to turn plastics into fuels or attempting to reduce it to its original monomer form to be repolymerized. A 2020 Gaia report based on publicly available information found that of the 37 advanced plastic recycling facilities proposed since the early 2000s, only 3 are currently operational, and none are successfully recovering plastic to produce new plastic. It will take all of us working from the local to the global level. Solutions will require governments to regulate, businesses to innovate, and individuals to act. It's important to support actions that stop the overproduction of plastics, particularly single-use plastics, stop the greenwashing and false solutions, support a regenerative, circular economy, and support actions to stop the harm and injustice at every stage of plastic pollution. We need better transparency and regulations of the toxic chemicals associated with plastics. And we need big brands to switch their business models to refill and reuse. The plastic industry and big businesses like top polluters such as Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Unilever, Nestle, and Procter & Gamble are causing harm to life on the planet. Whatever regulations, intentions, or unmet goals are in place, they're not working. And the problem is too big to be solved at the individual level. For these reasons, we need better global, national, and local regulations and accountability. When we think about actions, we can look at actions at the global, national, and local levels. Because of our time, I won't go into depth regarding global level actions, but I want to mention 2 important areas. In March of 2022, the United Nations Environmental Assembly adopted a mandate to start negotiating over the next 2 years a legally binding global plastic treaty that addresses the whole life cycle of plastic. If you are interested in actions regarding this global treaty process, I encourage you to check out some of the many organizations working for the best outcomes for this treaty. Some of the organizations include Break Free from Plastic, Greenpeace, Gaia, the Center for International Environmental Law, and the Plastic Pollution Coalition. Another global action area is the Basel Convention, which is the global treaty that seeks to prevent uncontrolled exports of hazardous wastes, which includes plastic. I recommend checking out the organization BAN, the Basel Action Network, for actions on this issue. A national bill that addresses many of the plastic pollution issues needs your support, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. One of the many organizations working in support of this bill is Break Free from Plastic. I like their summary of the bill. This act will reduce plastic production before it has the chance to pollute, increase actual recycling rates, and protect vulnerable communities. Beyond Plastics urges you to support this bill and offers guidance and options for emailing or calling your congressional members. You can follow Beyond Plastics on social media, and on the Beyond Plastics website, you can make a secure donation, find updates, or participate in calls for action. The website has many resources, and you can find actions that fit the time you have available. Beyond Plastics is building a grassroots movement to address plastic pollution and offers training and resources for becoming your own Beyond Plastics local or affiliate group, or joining a group if there's one nearby. If you have questions or want more information, you can contact Alexis Goldsmith at bennington.edu. regulatory actions to reduce plastic pollution on a local level in Montana are banned by House Bill 407, which passed during the last 2021 legislative session. HB 407 is a ban on any local ordinances banning auxiliary containers, which includes single-use plastics. If you want to be part of reducing plastic pollution through statewide legislative action in the upcoming legislative session, please contact me at youpa.zwmt@gmail.com. I look forward to connecting. Also, if you use Facebook, I co-manage the Facebook group Working Toward Plastic Free in Montana, and I'll be posting updates there. Action is hope. By working together, we can strengthen our actions and amplify our voices. Thank you for taking time to listen to this talk. That was a lot of information. If you have questions or if you want to connect, you can contact me at my email, Youpa, YOUPA, .zwmt@gmail.com. Thanks again. I hope to hear from you.